In the Middle Ages, when castles stood like stone titans, defying the heavens with their battlements, and knights paraded in armor that clanked louder than a blacksmith hammering away, there was one accessory that reigned supreme in courts, halls, and on the heads of anyone who wanted to flaunt more than just an inherited title: the wig. These elaborate hairpieces, curled to resemble aristocratic bird nests and powdered with a zeal bordering on obsession, were not just a fleeting fashion. They were a status symbol, a curtain for vanity, and, above all, a hiding place for a secret so revolting it could make even the bravest crusader drop his sword. Beneath those meticulously crafted false manes lurked a universe of horrors: lice colonies more organized than a medieval guild, odors that could fell an ox, and a creativity that turned misery into a spectacle worthy of a royal banquet. Let's dive into this world of fake hair, rancid ointments, and unexpected plagues, with an informative tone but a wink of humor, because if we don't laugh a little, the imagined stench might be unbearable. To understand why wigs became the star accessory of the era, we must step back to a time when appearance was the currency of social standing. In the 13th century, baldness wasn't just an aesthetic issue. It was a stigma that could cost you a marriage, an ally, or the respect of your vassals. Losing hair was associated with old age, weakness, or, worst of all, leprosy, a word that in the Middle Ages sparked more panic than a dragon in a straw market. Men, especially nobles, needed to project youth, vigor, and an aura of superiority, and a bald head was about as useful for that as a parchment shield in battle. Women, too, turned to wigs to flaunt longer, fuller, more everything hair, as a lush mane was a sign of fertility, beauty, and often a ticket to an advantageous marriage. But it wasn't just vanity fueling this obsession. Hygiene, or rather its absence, was the driving force. Bathing wasn't a daily ritual. In fact, many physicians of the time, with their stained robes and hole-ridden theories, believed hot water opened pores and let diseases in, an idea that makes us chuckle today but was as unquestionable then as a papal edict. With heads seeing soap less often than a comet, wigs offered a miraculous solution. Cover the chaos of the scalp and, in the process, look like you'd spent the morning in a non-existent beauty salon. Let's talk about how these marvels of false hair were made. They weren't exactly products of a quality-controlled factory. Human hair was the preferred material, but here's where the story gets murky, like a stew forgotten in a castle kitchen. Where did this hair come from? Well, the medieval market didn't have certified origin labels. Much of the hair came from people selling it out of necessity. Peasant women cutting their braids for a sack of wheat, servants sacrificing their locks for a few coins, or nuns shaving their heads upon taking vows, leaving their hair as an offering to poverty or the black market. But it wasn't always so innocent. Rumors, likely exaggerated but with a grain of truth, suggested some unscrupulous merchants harvested hair from corpses, either dug up from cemeteries or snipped from the gallows after a public execution. Imagine donning a wig made from the hair of someone who met their end at the hangman's noose. Not exactly the kind of recycling you'd brag about on medieval LinkedIn. For those who couldn't afford human hair, wigs were made from horsehair, sheep's wool, or even plant fibers like flax or hemp. These budget versions were stiff, impossible to style, and smelled like you'd slept in a stable after a storm. And if you're wondering how these wigs were secured to the head, the answer is as charming as it sounds: with glue. Specifically, a mix of resin, wax, and often animal fat. Yes, melted pig or sheep grease slathered on your scalp like you were crafting an aristocratic candle. Pure medieval glamour. Now, here's the real heart of this tale, the nasty secret no one at court wanted to mention, not even in a whisper during a banquet. Beneath those wigs, heads were their own ecosystems, and not exactly a meadow full of daisies. The lack of hygiene turned scalps into a paradise for lice, the absolute monarchs of this hairy kingdom. These parasites didn't care about titles or lineage. Dukes, countesses, bishops, all were fair game. And wigs, with their dark nooks, warm, humid environment, and total lack of ventilation, were like a five-star resort for them. But lice weren't the only guests at this party. Fleas, mites, and, in extreme cases, small rodents could make cameo appearances. Medieval chronicles, written with a mix of horror and morbid fascination, described nobles feeling movement under their wigs, only to remove them and discover a miniature zoo that would make any farmer pale. It wasn't an everyday occurrence, but it was common enough that barbers, who doubled as surgeons, dentists, and apparently exterminators, offered scalp disinfection services. These treatments often involved mercury-based ointments, vinegar, or, in desperate cases, arsenic, which burned more than an insult at a jousting tournament. Yes, mercury was as toxic as it sounds. Mercury poisoning was a risk some were willing to take to evict their unwanted tenants, because nothing says priorities like choosing slow poison over constant itching. The smell was another issue, and not one easily ignored. Picture a wig that's never washed, soaked in sweat, grease, and the remnants of whatever the wearer ate at the last banquet, because medieval folks weren't exactly experts at eating without dropping crumbs. To combat this odor, which could knock out a horse, nobles used perfumed powders made from starch, flour, or even chalk, mixed with floral essences like lavender, rose, or clove. These powders not only gave the wig an aristocratic whiteness but also tried, with limited success, to mask the stench of unfiltered humanity. The problem was, the effect lasted less than a truce between rival kingdoms. After a couple of days, the powder mixed with grease, forming a paste that, at best, smelled like stale bread and, at worst, something I won't describe to spare your lunch. Servants had the unenviable task of refreshing wigs, a job that ranked among the worst medieval gigs alongside cleaning latrines. This involved brushing, repowdering, and, if the budget allowed, spritzing with perfume imported from places like Byzantium or Damascus, where they at least knew how to make a scent last. But even with all this effort, the smell lingered, and in a hall full of wig-wearing nobles, the air could be so thick you'd need an axe to cut through it. Not everything was suffering under those wigs, though it sometimes felt like it. There was genuine pride in sporting a fine piece, as if you were wearing a crown of curls. Wig-makers, or perruquiers as they were called in fancier courts, were true artists of their time. They crafted wigs as tall as wedding cakes, with curls that defied gravity and adornments like feathers, ribbons, jewels, and, in the most extravagant cases, taxidermied birds. Yes, a dead canary on your head was the medieval equivalent of a designer handbag, because nothing says, "I'm rich," like an accessory that looks like an avian graveyard. These wigs were so heavy that some required an internal frame, like a wire or wooden cage, to hold them up. Walking with one was a balancing act that would impress a circus juggler. And if you've ever wondered why medieval nobles look so stiff in portraits, now you know. They were literally bearing the weight of their social status, with tense necks and straight backs to keep their wigs from tumbling to the floor. But let's return to the dark side, because this is where things get truly juicy. Infections were a constant risk. The scalp, trapped under a wig that didn't let the skin breathe, could develop sores, eczema, or something far worse, like abscesses requiring the intervention of a barber surgeon with his rusty knife. Physicians of the era, whose training was a mix of astrology, superstition, and sheer improvisation, recommended remedies ranging from useless to downright dangerous. A common one was slathering the head with a mix of honey and ashes, which supposedly absorbed impurities. In practice, it just attracted more bugs, turning the scalp into a flytrap. Another popular remedy was a paste of crushed garlic, which burned the skin and made the wearer smell like a forgotten kitchen. In severe cases, bloodletting was the go-to, because, naturally, if you have lice, the best solution is to weaken yourself further. The irony is that many of these issues could have been avoided with a simple hair wash, but the medieval mindset wasn't ready for that revolution. Washing hair was seen as an unnecessary luxury, and in some circles, even a sign of weakness. Here's a tidbit that'll make you laugh or cringe, depending on your sense of humor. In the more refined courts, like the French ones in later centuries, scratching sticks became popular. These were small rods of wood, bone, or ivory that nobles carried discreetly to relieve itching without removing their wigs in public. Picture a duke mid-debate on politics, scratching his head with a stick like he's conducting an invisible orchestra. It was so common that some sticks were designed as luxury items, encrusted with gold, pearls, or heraldic engravings. Because even in misery, medieval folks knew how to add a touch of class. In some courts, these sticks became a status symbol in their own right, with nobles showing off their collections like they were swords. Hey, if you're enjoying this dive into the medieval world, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more historical content with a dash of humor. Hit that button and join the community that wants to know it all, even the grossest secrets. Not everyone in the Middle Ages wore wigs, mind you. Peasants, who barely had time to scratch their heads, let alone adorn them, made do with their own matted locks, however dirty or tangled. Wigs were a luxury, a status symbol that separated those who could afford an elaborate hair disaster from those who just had a natural one. But even among nobles, not everyone was on board with this trend. Some clerics, for instance, saw wigs as a sign of sinful vanity. In various ecclesiastical councils, with their endless debates and even longer beards, they argued over whether wearing false hair was a crime against Christian humility. Some bishops claimed wigs were an affront to divine creation, while others, probably sporting their own wigs, defended them as tools to project authority. Spoiler: they never reached a consensus, and nobles kept flaunting their wigs like crowns, while the vainer clerics did the same in private. And if you want to dig deeper into this topic, check out the book linked in the description for more details. But let's keep going. Wigs also had a practical side, ironic as that sounds given the chaos they hid. In an era where skin diseases were as common as court gossip, a wig could conceal rashes, scars, or any mark that might make you the target of whispers. Plus, they standardized appearance at court, where everyone wanted to look like the medieval equivalent of a troubadour superstar. But this uniformity came at a cost, and not just financial. Keeping a wig in minimally presentable condition required time, money, and a tolerance for smells that would seem heroic today. Nobles spent hours on their hair rituals, with servants brushing, powdering, and adjusting every curl like they were crafting a masterpiece for an invisible gallery. Another fascinating, and slightly gross, detail is how wigs affected social interactions. At a banquet, it wasn't uncommon for someone to discreetly scratch under their wig, accidentally dusting their neighbor's plate with perfumed powder, sparking glares, and gossip that lasted weeks. Or, in a moment of carelessness, a poorly secured wig might slip, revealing a scalp that looked like a map of Egypt's plagues. These incidents fueled courtly intrigues, because if medieval folks loved anything as much as their wigs, it was talking smack about each other. And let's not forget shared wigs. Yes, in some noble households, wigs were a family heirloom, passed from father to son or even lent between siblings. Imagine the face of a young noble putting on his uncle's wig and discovering it came with extras, like a lice nest or a smell that could topple castle walls. These shared wigs were especially common in less wealthy families, where a single good wig was the pride of the lineage and the epicenter of their nightmares. Let's talk about medieval attempts to tackle the scalp plague problem, because this is where their creativity shines, or stinks, depending on your perspective. Beyond toxic mercury ointments and scratching sticks, there were home remedies that would make us laugh until we cry. A popular one was wrapping the head in a cloth soaked in horse urine, which supposedly repelled lice. There's no evidence it worked, but it definitely ensured everyone kept their distance. Another method was burning sulfur near the wig, hoping the smoke would kill the bugs. This, of course, left the wig smelling like a volcano and, in more than one case, caused accidental fires. Because nothing screams elegance like a wig ablaze during a courtly dance. Some nobles, more ingenious or desperate, tried herbal baths, soaking the wig in infusions of rosemary, thyme, sage, or even nettles, which were thought to have repellent properties. This didn't kill the lice, but at least made the wig smell like stew instead of a stable. In extreme cases, wigs were burned, a practical and symbolic act, as if destroying them exorcised the sins of vanity. Wigs also had a surprising economic impact. The hair trade was a lucrative business, with trade routes connecting European markets to Asia and Africa. In port cities like Venice, Genoa, or Bruges, merchants offered hair in every texture and color, from jet black from the east to pale blonde from Nordic regions. But this trade wasn't without issues. Imported wigs often came with their own tenants, meaning lice could travel continents like they had a VIP pass. And when a wig reached its final owner after months on a ship where fresh air was a luxury, the smell could be so potent that some left it to air out for weeks before daring to wear it. In local markets, hair sellers competed with promises of quality, but scams were rampant. It wasn't uncommon for a noble to pay a fortune for a virgin hair wig only to find it was dyed horsehair or, worse, infested before it left the shop. In wealthier courts, wigs were a symbol of power but also paranoia. Nobles lived in constant fear of sabotage. It wasn't unheard of for a rival to send a gifted wig that, surprise, was crawling with lice or laced with irritant powders causing rashes. These palace intrigues made nobles trust their barbers like spies, and for good reason. A barber could ruin your reputation with a bad trim, an accidental ointment mishap, or a well-placed rumor about your scalp's condition. That's why top perruquiers were so valued, some earning salaries rivaling knights and even traveling with their lords as part of the official entourage. In larger courts, like Paris or London, perruquiers formed their own guilds with strict rules and hierarchies that rivaled the clergy's. Being accepted into one was an honor but also a responsibility, as a single mistake could cost you your head, metaphorically or otherwise. If you want to learn more, check out the book linked in the description for a deeper dive. But let's not get sidetracked. Wigs also influenced fashion in a big way. Hats, for instance, were designed specifically to accommodate these massive hairpieces, explaining why some headgear looks more like bird cages or miniature fortresses. Capes, doublets, and even shoes were tailored to balance the wig's weight, because no one wanted to look like a melting snowman in the middle of a hall. In churches, wigs caused a logistical issue that's hilarious today. The tallest ones blocked the view of worshippers in the back, leading some priests, braver than wise, to ask nobles to leave their wigs at home for mass. Naturally, no one listened, as removing a wig was like showing up naked at court. Some priests resorted to sermons on vanity, glaring pointedly at the most ostentatious wigs, but this only made nobles wear their false manes with more pride. Another curious, slightly disturbing aspect is how wigs affected romantic life. In an era where courtship was as complex as an alchemical treatise, a well-placed wig could mean the difference between winning a heart or landing in the medieval friend zone. A voluminous, perfectly curled, powdered wig was a magnet for attention, and nobles knew it. But there were risks. A wig falling off during a romantic moment could kill the mood faster than a tone-deaf troubadour singing about warts. And don't get me started on kissing. Getting close to a powdered wig was like sticking your face in a flower cloud, and more than one suitor ended up sneezing at the worst moment, with results ranging from laughter to outright rejection. Yet wigs offered an unexpected advantage. They could hide secret messages. Some ladies tucked notes, jewels, or even perfume vials among the curls, a practice spies exploited eagerly. In the most intrigue-filled courts, a wig could be both a seduction tool and a secret mailbox, adding an extra layer of drama to every dance. If you made it this far, you're a true history buff. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch more stories like this, packed with quirky details and a bit of humor. Click the button and join our community. Let's dive deeper into wig-making processes, because this is where medieval craftsmanship shows its most ingenious and precarious side. Perruquiers used rudimentary tools, bone combs with teeth so fine they could snap at the first tangle, iron scissors that needed constant sharpening, and wooden needles to sew hair onto the wig's base, usually a thick cloth or linen mesh. The sewing process was tedious, with each strand knotted by hand, taking days for a single wig. Skilled artisans used wooden molds to shape the wig, ensuring a perfect fit, though perfect is generous in a world without standardized measurements. For cheaper wigs, the base might be tanned leather, more durable but also stiffer and prone to cracking, adding a new level of discomfort. Dyes, when used, were another challenge. Natural colors like black or brown came from herb and mineral mixes, but exotic shades like red or blonde required costly, corrosive ingredients like saffron or sulfur. More than one perruquier ended up with burned hands or a ruined reputation when the dye faded mid-banquet. Efforts to combat lice were another arena where medieval imagination ran wild. Beyond mercury ointments and sulfur smoke, some nobles tried exotic concoctions like fermented manure diluted in vinegar, applied to the scalp in hopes of suffocating parasites. Spoiler: it didn't work, but it guaranteed a wide berth. Others used nettle infusions, thought to irritate lice, though they irritated human skin more. In desperate courts, homemade traps, like bits of meat placed inside the wig to lure insects, then removed with tweezers, were tried. This was about as effective as putting out a fire with a leaky bucket. Some nobles turned to spells and prayers, convinced lice were divine punishment for sins. One clever cleric sold relics, like blessed hair strands supposedly protecting against infestations, about as useful as an umbrella in a sandstorm. Courtly intrigues involving wigs deserve their own chapter. In competitive courts like Paris or Florence, wigs were a double-edged sword. A noble could win the king's favor with a flawless wig but become a laughingstock if it betrayed their secrets. Rivals might send a servant to tamper with a wig, adding irritant powders, infesting it with lice, or snipping a lock to make it look sloppy. In an English court, a jealous lady reportedly laced her rival's wig with an itching ointment, forcing her to scratch in public and lose a suitor's favor. In another case, a French spy used a hollow wig to hide secret documents, passing unnoticed during a search. These stories, sometimes embellished by chroniclers, show wigs were more than accessories. They were tools of power, betrayal, and even seduction. Differences between men's and women's wigs are also rich in detail. Men's wigs were shorter, structured, and designed to project authority and masculinity, favoring natural-looking styles with moderate curls and sober colors like brown or black. Women's wigs were a creative explosion, some so long they grazed the floor, so tall they needed wire frames, or so adorned they resembled walking gardens. Noble women competed for the most spectacular wigs, incorporating preserved flowers, pearls, silk ribbons, and even tiny mirrors reflecting candlelight. In some courts, women's wigs were changed multiple times daily, like dresses, with specific styles for morning, afternoon, and evening banquets. This obsession required entire teams of maids dedicated to wigs, a logistical feat rivaling a small army. Some women's wigs had hidden reliquaries, small compartments for jewels, love notes, or even poisons, because in the Middle Ages, romance and intrigue went hand in hand. Superstitions about wigs also merit their own chapter. In some regions, hair from executed people was thought to bring bad luck or curses, making wigs of dubious origin suspect. Nobles often demanded proof their wig came from a pure source, like a maiden or monk. Others believed wigs could absorb their previous wearer's essence, leading to odd rituals like blessing them with holy water or exposing them to moonlight to cleanse spirits. In paranoid courts, nobles hired seers to check wigs for curses, a practice that enriched charlatans and fueled intrigue. In a Byzantine court, a wig was publicly burned after a seer claimed it was possessed by its former owner, a noble executed for treason. These beliefs reflect the medieval mindset, where the practical and mystical blended seamlessly. Regional variations in wig use are another fascinating topic. In Scandinavian kingdoms, wigs were sometimes made from reindeer hair, tougher in cold but coarse and hard to style. In Byzantium, elite wigs might include woven gold or silver threads, dazzling but heavy. In Islamic Iberian courts, wigs were rare, but women used hair extensions adorned with glass beads mimicking jewels. In Italy, wigs were a canvas for creativity, with designs featuring pearls, lace, preserved flowers, or wax figures depicting mythological or religious scenes. In Germanic states, men's wigs were shorter and practical, while women's could be so elaborate they needed two maids to set them. Each region had its style, but lice, smells, and infections were a universal plague. Wig-related mishaps are a goldmine of anecdotes. A 14th-century French chronicle tells of a count who, during a tournament, lost his wig to a lance blow, revealing a scalp so sore-riddled the crowd laughed instead of cheering the victor. An English court lady dropped her wig into a soup cauldron at a banquet, sparking a months-long scandal and earning her the nickname Lady Broth. Then there's the Italian bishop whose wig unleashed a mouse during a solemn mass, causing chaos the congregation took as a bad omen. In a German court, a young noble's vigorous dance to impress a lady ended with his wig caught on a chandelier, dangling like a trophy as he fled in shame. In a Castilian procession, a crow stole a wig, mistaking it for nest material, leaving the noble chasing the bird to the crowd's delight. These tales, sometimes exaggerated, show how wigs were a common source of public humiliation, and how medieval humor found joy in even the worst embarrassments. Efforts to keep wigs pest-free evolved, though that's a generous term for trial and error. Beyond toxic ointments and sulfur smoke, nobles tried herbal baths, soaking wigs in rosemary, thyme, sage, or nettle infusions thought to repel pests. These didn't kill lice but made the wig smell less like a stable. Others stored wigs in lavender-lined boxes, believed to deter insects but more likely to attract bees. Superstitious nobles tucked amulets like wolf teeth or silver crosses into storage boxes to ward off curses or infestations. Burning a wig was a last resort, both practical and symbolic, but not taken lightly, as even infested wigs were costly investments. Wigs also shaped daily life in absurd ways. In castles and noble homes, wigs had dedicated storage, often in ornate cabinets resembling pagan shrines, designed to protect against dust, damp, and mice who saw wigs as prime nesting material. In grand courts, these cabinets had iron locks and gilded decorations, as if guarding relics. Servants, or valets de perruque in French courts, faced a grueling task requiring patience, a strong stomach, and resignation. Brushing a wig could take hours, especially if tangled, dusty, or crawling with resistant critters. For demanding nobles, every curl had to be perfect, like sculpting a masterpiece for an invisible museum. Some servants used specialized tools, like fine-toothed bone combs or boar bristle brushes, the pinnacle of hair tech. Wigs influenced literature and art, too, beyond mere props. In epic poems, lush manes symbolized heroism and virility, and wigs let nobles mimic these heroes like medieval cosplayers. In portraits, artists exaggerated wig volume to flatter clients, creating almost cartoonish images with oversized heads. But there were critics. Satirical poets mocked the wig obsession, comparing them to bird nests, insect traps, or dung crowns in disguise. In a 13th century English play, a character's wig falls off, revealing a ghastly scalp, prompting audience laughter and an improvised vanity monologue that steals the show. Preachers used wigs as metaphors for human falsehood, though their sermons fell on deaf ears as nobles arrived at church with ever taller false manes. In conclusion, medieval wigs were far more than accessories. They reflected the vanity, ingenuity, and misery of an era where appearance trumped comfort or common sense. From lice-turning scalps into zoos to odors defying any perfume, these fake manes told a story of excess, contradiction, and a remarkable ability to ignore the obvious. Next time you see a medieval noble's portrait with a flawless wig, remember the chaotic scalp world beneath those perfect curls, a world that would make anyone blanch. And if you wonder how they endured it, the answer is simple. With pride, a hefty dose of denial, and probably a less sensitive nose than ours.